Hello good people and welcome to Finance Skills Hub. Here we learn, we connect and we grow. Well, in this case study we want to build an actual versus budget dashboard. But here's what we want you to learn: the ability to let the dashboard compare actual and budget as at a certain date. Now that date is going to be an input from you. So if you're able to put that date in a cell, it's connecting to Power Pivot, updating your data model and updating your dashboard as well. It's a very simple case study. So if you again join me in Excel, let's explore DAX Power Pivot in Excel together. Right, so here is our simple case study. We have an actual and budget dashboard that shows us our balance, right? My catch here is that you can run the actual and budget as at a certain point. And that point is here, the date that you put in, right? So for this dashboard, what we've done is that we've put in and add in a date picker just to make it a bit more elegant, but you can do away with that. So the whole idea is that I can select any department. So HR, compare how much HR has spent against budget, IT, operations, and so on. And here, if I make any changes to this date and I refresh, the calculation should be able to update and then give me the variance, the actual and budget as at that date. So we'll explore Power Pivot, we'll explore DAX formulas, and then we'll learn how to add this date picker, create our simple actual budget chart as you see it here, and you should be able to get a sense of how to do this. We shared the start file with you, so please come along step by step and let's complete this together. Okay, so when you open the start file, you can see three tables. This table is the actual table, this is the budget table, and this is the list of departments that we are working with. Now we made it simple. It's the structure of the table that matters. So I have dates, I have the activity, the amount that was budgeted, and the department it was budgeted for. Then same for the budget table as well. Then we've extracted the unique department here to allow us to feed the slicer we are going to use. As you are already aware, these are tables. These tables have been named accordingly. So this is the actual table, this is the budget table, and then this is segments or departments. Now, the first thing we are going to do is to load these tables into Power Pivot. This is important because we'll be working from Excel's data model. And Power Pivot is the tool in Excel that we use to create the data model. So I already have my Power Pivot enabled. If you are new to Power Pivot, you can enable it by going to Data, right? Then in the Data Tools group, you have this option here, Manage the Data Model, right? So if you click on this, it activates Power Pivot with a blank screen. You can close it back, and once you return to your command tabs, you notice that Power Pivot is enabled here. Now, if Power Pivot is enabled here, what we need to do is to select the first table, stand in there, and add this to the data model. So I'm going to add the first table to the data model. Right, so you notice that it loads it. Then you can close the Power Pivot window, come to your budget table, and then add again this one to the data model. So we currently have two tables. Then you close this one, and finally you can add the segments to the data model as well. Right, so this is Power Pivot. Now the reason we've added these to the data model is that we are going to be connecting the tables. That's the first thing. So once these tables are here, you can see that actual, budget, and segments are the three tabs that we have here. We are in the data view of Power Pivot. Now there's a diagram view here that allows us to see the same tables that we've loaded this time around in a visual manner, right? So these two tables, actual and budget, are where we are going to calculate from. They contain the amounts that we are going to compare, actual and budget. Segments is going to be the table that we are going to use to create the slicer. which will contain each department, right? So in real terms, these are our fact tables, and this segment becomes our dimension table, right? If you are creating an actual and budget dashboard and you need a time intelligence calculation, Power Pivot allows you to also create a calendar table. Okay, you have an option to create a date table here where it will scan the beginning and end and then give you a series of dates, right? So for purpose of learning, I'm going to create that calendar table, which in this case is acting as a dimension table. Okay, so we now have to connect our tables. So starting with the actual table, the order doesn't really matter. So I'm going to connect segment, which is our foreign key here, to this segment, which is our primary key. Repeat the same process, segment for budgets going into segments in here. So I've created a one-to-many relationship. Then I'll come here and then create date to date, and then also come here and then create date to date for. So what this means is that we can now comfortably create any calculation and also create pivot tables by referencing these connected tables. And this is what we call the data model, right? So once we are done with this, let's go in and calculate our measures. So I'm going to close the Power Pivot window. Then in the Power Pivot tab, you have the option to access the measures icon. The measures icon allows us to create measures. See the measures as regular calculations like you do in Excel, but just that in this case, you are using the tables you have loaded into the data model. And here we use a formula language called DAX, Data Analysis Expressions. So I'll come in here, but before we go, let's be clear on the kind of measure we are going to do. The measure basically is going to sum all the amount in the actual table and also sum all the amount in the budget table. This is going to be our primary calculations. Then later, we will now add a modifier or a filter that will help us cut off as at a date that we input. So let's get that done. So I'll come here, measures, new measure. For purposes of this, you can store all your measures in the actual table. In some cases, you can create a dedicated table to get this done. So my measure name is going to be actual. Okay, so I'll come here. It's going to be a simple sum. So sum, which is in this case a DAX function going into our actual amount. Okay, so actual is the table, amount is the column. I'll close my bracket. You can check your formula to be sure you haven't made any error. Then I can format this using 1000 separator. I can also set it to a 2 decimal place. I do this so that anywhere the measure appears, it should already be formatted, right? So I'll click OK. So I have my first measure. This is stored in memory. When we create our pivot tables, we should be able to pull these measures and then use them in our dashboard. Second measure, new measure, still in the actual table. I'll come in here and call this budget. So this is also going to be sum, budget amount, and I'll close my bracket. Check number, 1000 separator, 2 decimal place. Formula is fine, and I'll click OK. Okay, so now that we've created these two key measures, let's create a pivot table that is going to show us the values we have currently. So we'll add a blank sheet here. Let's call this calculations, right? So here we are able to insert a pivot table from the data model that we just created in this existing worksheet, and then I'll click OK. So you'll notice that if I come to my actual table, the measures I created, which is actual and budget, are already here. So I'll check actual, which is currently 28,398, and then I'll check budget, which is 36,729, right? So this is the base case. Now, what we want to achieve is this. When the user puts in a value, which is going to be in our dashboard, we want that value to be captured and linked to the data model. Okay. Now, because we're working in the data model, it will be difficult to just reference the cell directly, because in the data model, basically your inputs are columns or tables. Okay, so we want to capture that input in our dashboard and then use it to create a table, just a single column table, and then add that as well to our data model. So let's see how we do that. So I'll come here. In the start workbook, we've already given you these shapes with shadows, okay, so that you get an idea where each figure is going to be placed. Now, for the user, the inputs or the date is going to be in this cell. Okay, so if you like, I will just highlight this for you. So if the user is currently using today's date, okay, control semicolon brings in today's date. This is what the user is going to put in. I want the values as of this date. We want a table that will capture this. Okay, so in here, I'm going to create a reference to that. So I'll do an equal to, come to the dashboard, and then reference this data. So this is the input. Then based on this, I'm going to create a table. Okay, so I'll create a single column table. I'll highlight this, go to insert a table. My table already has headers. This is the date, and then it has a single entry, right? So let me call this inputs dates underscore dates, or just to make it easier, let's call it input. Okay, so this input now has to go into our data model, right? So I'll stand in here just as we did earlier, go to Power Pivot, and I'll load this into the data model as well. So we currently have 5 tables. Okay, now once we have this table here, we are now going to run a formula that will bring that single entry, which is the date, into the data model. Then we use that to modify our DAX formula. So to do that, it's going to be a simple max or min, okay? Anything that would aggregate and give us the value. Of course, there's only one value here, so whether you run min or max will mean that that single value is going to show up. Okay, so now let's proceed and then create our measure. So I'll come here, new measure. Okay, so let's call this selected dates. I'm putting the two words together. Makes it easier when you are using it in DAX. So I'll come here and we'll run a max, which is the maximum, on the table called inputs. Okay, and then the column is input dates. So I'll close my bracket. Check formula. We don't need to format it. Dates are essentially values. So in the general form, it's still useful, right? So I'll come here and then I'll click OK. So what we now have is we have our 3 measures. If I come to manage measures, the sum of actual amount, which is our actual, same for budget, and then we have our selected date. Now, we are going to modify these 2 measures, the actual and budget, so that it runs only up to the dates that we've selected. So example, if I select 22nd June, okay, the sum is going to run up to this point. Same for budget, it's going to run up to this point. Good idea. So the original measures that we calculated, we are now going to modify them. So let's get that done. Okay, so at this point, let's proceed and create the new measures by editing the existing ones. So I'll come to measures, go to manage measures. So here I see the ones we created. So let's modify or edit the actual. I select this, I come to edit. So we are going to introduce a new function. That function is called calculate. Right, so I'm stepping down with Shift Enter. Right after the equal sign, I'll introduce calculate. What calculate does is it takes an existing expression, in this case, the calculation we did earlier, which is sum amount. Okay, bring a comma. I want to filter this using the calendar table or the date table. So to do that, I'm going to use the function filter. The reason I'm doing this is I want to bring in all the dates in the calendar table. That's why I'm using all. Okay, so this will ensure that the calendar table is not filtered. But if I close this, we want the filter expression after this comma to be everything in the calendar table. So I'll bring the calendar table again, less than or equal to our selected date. Okay, so I'll close my brackets and close again for calculate. So what we are saying is take the actual amount, what you've calculated, and then ensure that you only sum dates that are less than or equal to the selected date, the one that we derived from the max calculation, right? So let's check our formula. Looks fine. Okay, we'll maintain the 2 decimal place formatting. Okay, and we'll click OK. So this has now been modified. Let's come and do same for our budget. So I'll edit this. So again, I'll come here, introduce calculate. Okay, bring a comma, step down, shift, enter, filter, bring all, call the calendar table. Okay, close this bracket and then put in the filter expression where calendar date is less than equal to this cutoff, which is the selected date. Close for filter, close for calculate. Check our formula, everything is fine here, and then we click OK. Now, before I step out, let's create the variance. So, depending on how you want to look at it, this one can be budget minus actual or vice versa. We use budget minus actual in this case. So, we'll come here and then introduce variance. So, I will call with the square brackets the modified budget measure minus our actual. Okay, so I'll check my formula, set this to 2 decimal place with 1,000 separator, and I'll click OK. So once I close this, I now have the variance here, so I can add a variance to this. Currently, it is set to 8331. Now let's go and modify our date. So we'll come to our dashboard. This is 13 September, the time of recording this video. But I want to take it back to, let's say, 22nd June for actual and budget, as you can see it here. So I'll come to the dashboard and then update this to 22nd June 2025. Right. So let's see if on refresh these numbers will update. So I'll come to data and then I'll refresh all. Right. So you notice that my actual is now 16,000 and my budget is 19. My variance is 2,000. Let's go and then check from our data. So from here, if I sum all the way up to 22nd June, I have my 16,000. Okay. Same for budgets. If I come here up to here, I have 19,000. Okay. So what it means is that if you are using this dashboard and you want to update, you just have to input this date over here. Okay. So now the core architecture is done. Let's now come and then complete our dashboard. Okay, so at this point, all we need to do is bring in our calculations from the pivot table and then complete our dashboard. These are shapes. They've been formatted and you have some shadows just to bring it out of the white background. Now, the trick with inputting numbers in shapes is, especially from pivot tables, is to select the shape. Okay, stand in the formula bar, bring in an equal to, go to your pivot table and select it. Okay, now if you press enter and you get an error, it's basically because your pivot table has the get pivot data feature turned on. Right, so before you do that, escape, reverse the process, come to pivot table, analyze, go to options, and make sure you uncheck the generate get pivot data feature here, and then come back and repeat the process. Okay, so I just brought in this. I'll use the same process to bring in my budget. So I'll come here to calculations, bring in my budget, and I have that. Then my variance which is my balance here. I'll come in and then bring that here as well. Okay. I can highlight, control, select all these, and then bolding and increase it to probably about 24 on my screen. Okay. So this is how you feed your cards or shapes in Excel. Now, let's bring in our slicer. So for our slicer, we can insert our slicer from the data model. So I'll click slicer. Then I have the option to put this, to switch it to the data model. Okay. And once I open it, I'll see the tables that are in there. I want to insert my slicer on the segment section. So I'll choose segments and I'll click OK. So this gives me the default slicer. Okay. So at this point, you can format it to fit your dashboard theme. So we did an earlier video on how to format your slicers. I've shared a link in the description of this video, so you can access that. But for this, we are keeping it very minimal. So I'll choose this gray theme. Now, usually from the data model, the slicers don't work until you connect it to the pivot table. Okay, so I'm going to right click this, go to report connections and connect it to the pivot table, and I'll click OK. So you notice that at this point, every department would come up. Okay, so that is how you connect this. Okay, so we are almost there. So the next thing that we need to do is to create our actual budget comparison chart, which is going to be like a bullet chart. Okay, so I'm going to reference the actual in the pivot table and then create a mirror of that data here. Control R, Control D. Okay. Then I'm going to insert, right? I'll go to recommended charts and come to all charts. Now, we want to choose this bar chart, right? But we want to create a stacked bar chart. Now, that stacked bar chart is going to be this one, where we have the actual and budget side by side. Okay, and I'm going to click OK. So this is going to have our budget and then we have our actual side by side. Let me take off the things that we don't need. Okay, so after taking those off, we now want to create our actual in the budget chart where we can track how much we are spending so far of the budget. Now, to be able to do that, this blue part is the actual and the orange part is the budget. I'm going to select the actual side, press Ctrl 1 to bring up the settings there. Then I'm going to plot this series, which is the actual, on the secondary axis. Once I do that, you see there's an overlap, so it hides the budget. So what we are going to do is to try and increase the gap width so that we can clearly see the actual, okay, which in this case is a bit narrow, then the budget is also behind. Okay, so once we plot the secondary axis, increase the gap width, we get that effect. Now, we want to set the axis, okay, to the same maximum value. So currently, this is plotting on 25,000, while this is plotting on 18,000 as the maximum numbers. So if you look at the range in the budget table, the maximum that we have in the data, at least when we sum everything here, is about 36,000, right? So giving a value of 40,000 would be fair for this display. So I'll select this first axis, come to the axis options, and I'll set the minimum at 0. Okay, and then so this is at 0, it's already there, and then we set this one at 40,000. Okay, I'll do same for this one as well. So we set this one at 0, and we set this at 40,000. Okay, so once we do that, you'll notice that now my actual is inside my budget. Now at this point, let's hide the axis. We are not deleting them, we are rather hiding them. So I'll select this, come down to labels, okay, currently set to next to axis, and we choose none. So that way it's there but it's hidden. Okay, we don't want to distort the display. So we'll do this one as well. Come next to axis, we switch this to none, and then we'll do this one as well. Next to axis, we switch this to none, right? So we are just left with our clean actual in budget charts, which we are going to take and position in our dashboard. So I'm going to cut this, Ctrl X, go to the dashboard and paste it over the area that I have demarcated for the actual versus the budget, for the actual versus budget display, right? So I'll stretch it all the way here. So once this is here, I'm going to shape outline, take off the outline, and then also take off the grid lines. Now let's put some color. Now let's change the colors a bit. So because budget is the actual, we want to select that and then give it a faint gray. Okay, so this is going to be the target, and then we'll take the actual, and here you can choose any color. So I'll give you this soft red here. So I'll give you this soft red here, and then I'll click OK. So at every point in time, we see how we are progressing towards our budget, right? Now let's do the data labels. So with the data labels, I will hit the plus sign and then check the data labels. At a point, it would feel like it's conflicting because of the position of both. They are too close. So you can select the budget label, press Ctrl 1, and come up here. So in the label options, we are going to choose inside end. Okay, so this will leave it at the end of the budget sheet, and then we have our actual here, right? Now to make it easier, you can even change the orientation of this, but before that, let's change the number formatting. So I'll come to the number formatting and then format this as a number to 2 decimal place, right? So while I'm here, I'll switch to the size and properties and then come to the text direction. It's currently set to horizontal, so I'll come here and rotate this, okay, to 90 degrees, right? Just to help it, just to make it easier for you to separate the budget and actual numbers when you use the slices. Okay, so I'll come here and then format this one as well. So the number is going to be a number format to 2 decimal place. Okay, then I can bold in this as well. Okay, so this is going to be our budget versus actual. So in this case, as an example, if I select HR, it shows me HR's targets. Okay, if I clear, I'm back to where I started from. Okay, so we are almost done. Now, the next thing we need to do is to put in a green and red label for positive variance or balance, and negative down arrow for when there is a negative variance, right? So let's quickly get that done. So to proceed, we want to use this variance cell as target. So I'm going to highlight that. The goal is this: if this returns positive, we'll have the up green arrow. Okay, if not, we have a down pointing arrow in red. So we'll start off with a simple if formula, which says that if this value is less than 0, okay, comma, we want to return the letter Q. So in double quotes, letter Q. Why we are using letter Q will make sense very soon. Otherwise, double quote P. Okay, so if it's less than 0Q, otherwise P. So currently we have P here. Let me just center. Okay, now P or Q, we are going to format this with a font type called Wingdings. So Wingdings 3 here is going to convert the P and Q into those arrows. Okay, so this is the positive and the other one is the negative. Right, so let's use the same cell to apply a conditional format to these shapes. So again, I'll select conditional formatting, new rule, use a formula to determine which cells to format. So here, I will come and reference this yellow cell. So if this yellow cell is greater than 0, then I'll come and set my font. So the font I want here is a green color. Okay. Then I'll click OK and then click OK for this. So this returns green. The reverse is this same cell. I'll come to new rule, use a formula to determine which cells to format. I'll come here, set this to the yellow cell and say if you are less than 0, okay, then the format we are going to apply here is a red font. Okay, so we click this. This will turn red if this is less than 0. So once we've done this, we are going to copy this cell, Control C, come to the dashboard. Okay, we are going to link this as an image. So in any empty cell, you can right click, use the paste special option. When you go in there, you see this linked picture, right? I mean, there are other ways to do this if you are using a more recent version of Excel, using the image in cell feature, but for this purpose, we are using the image. We are linking the cell as an image. So you can place it here nicely, okay? So this is going to be changing, right? So if I choose finance, realize finance goes down. If I clear, we are back up, okay? So that's pretty much how we are going to be doing this. Then the last thing that we need to do to our dashboard is to find an elegant way for our user to choose this date. As I mentioned, at this point, the user can directly type in here, but we can bring in an add-in, which we call a date picker, right? This feature is available on Excel online, but offline version not available yet. So we'll use an add-in. So under home, I'll go to add-ins and then look for date picker. We have this one here, which is called mini calendar. So I'll insert it, right? So the rule with this is once you insert it, the date you select is going to be in your active cell. Okay. So if I stand in here, this is where the date I select is going to be inputted. This is where the date I select is going to appear, right? So what's going to happen is I'm going to test this with today's date. So I'll select 13th. It will prompt me on whether I want to override what is there. You click OK. So this is 13th September, right? Now let's test and see if we'll get an update from June to the latest one. So I'll come to data, refresh all. Okay. So once we do that, you notice that we have our latest numbers. So essentially that's what we wanted to achieve. It's a rather simple dashboard, but I hope you've learned some key lessons. The whole idea is that if you have inputs in cells, you can load it as a single column table in Power Pivot, use DAX around that output, and then you can use that as a filter on your dates. So hopefully you've learned some key lessons here. I'll be happy to read your thoughts and comments when you start building your own version. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you in the next video. If this video was helpful and you would like to receive more of these videos directly on your WhatsApp, you can send ad to this WhatsApp number. We'll add you to our broadcast list so you receive our videos directly. You can also visit our YouTube channel, Finance Skills Hub. All our old videos are here. Please subscribe for notification of new videos or connect with us on any of these social media handles. Thank you so much for watching.